Whatever you missed, a spot that was the first thing she said to me. Not hello, not excuse me, just that sharp and loud enough to echo off marble, and then she added, get down on your knees and do it right, people like you always rush the corners. Yeah, that happened. And for a split second I honestly wondered if I'd stepped into some kind of bad joke. Because the restroom she was pointing at was spotless. I mean, you could see your reflection in the chrome, but she was already looking at me the way people look at a stain they want gone. I stood there holding my phone, my blazer still on my heels, clicking softly on the tile, and I could feel that familiar pressure in my chest, that mix of anger and exhaustion that comes from realizing someone has already decided who you are before you've even opened your mouth. She shoved a bottle of cleaner into my hands like it proved her point. Told me today was important, the new CEO was coming in, everything had to be perfect, and then she walked out without waiting for a response. The door swung shut, the room went quiet, and I just stood there breathing, because moments like that, they're never just about that one person. You know what I mean? They're about every other time something like this has happened and you were told to let it go. I took out my phone, not in a rush, not shaking, and I called Daniel and said, move the board meeting to 4. I need to handle something personal first. Then I set my executive badge down on the counter next to the mop and I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because right then I knew I was about to learn exactly what kind of company I had just bought. I decided not to leave. I walked out into the lobby like I belonged there because I did and nobody noticed me, which honestly told me more than any introduction ever could. People walked past me, through me, almost conversations continued, and then softened as I passed doors held for some and not for others. And I started seeing patterns the way you do when you're quiet and paying attention. At the security desk, there was a man named Richard. His badge said, Director of Operations, mid-50s, shoulders back, voice already raised at a young guard who looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. Richard glanced at me, and his eyes narrowed, not curious, just irritated. You with the cleaning crew? He asked, overdressed for maintenance, aren't you? I told him I was learning the layout, and he shook his head like I'd said something ridiculous. Told me maintenance wasn't supposed to wander the main floor, especially today, because yeah, the CEO was coming, whoever that was. He led me toward the service elevator close enough that I could smell his cologne, and on the way he started talking, really talking about cutting costs, trimming support, staff, how diversity initiatives slowed things down, and I just nodded because when people think you don't matter, they tell you everything. Upstairs on the executive floor, the air changed, quieter, softer, offices arranged like an unspoken hierarchy, framed policies on the walls that looked impressive, until you noticed the dates were years out of sync. That's where I met Karen from HR Heels, clicking posture, stiff eyes, already hard. She didn't greet me. She told me the bathrooms were unacceptable lately. Standards were slipping and waved off my questions with that tight smile that says you're not worth my time. I asked what she thought of the incoming CEO casually like I was making conversation, and she laughed, sharp and brittle, said hopefully, not another diversity hire, we don't need disruption right now. She said it standing under a poster about inclusion that had yellowed at the edges, and I remember thinking how strange it is that people never notice irony when it's staring them in the face. By the time I stepped into the executive lounge, the room went quiet, in that way that isn't dramatic but still hurts conversations, stopping mid-sentence, eyes flicking away, bodies angling just enough to exclude you without saying a word. I walked into the restroom again, the same one still immaculate, and I took photos because facts matter. Because later someone would say it wasn't like that. I was still holding my phone when the door burst open and Richard came in with 3 men in suits, their voices dying as soon as they saw me. What are you doing here? He snapped. This is an executive restroom. I told him I was checking the facilities and he laughed, turned to the men and said, good help is hard to find these days. You could hear the agreement in one chuckle, the discomfort in another silence. He opened a closet, shoved supplies at me, and told me since I was here I might as well make myself useful, really get in there. And I understood then that this wasn't about cleanliness, it was about control, about putting someone in their place in front of an audience. I knelt down and scrubbed a toilet that didn't need scrubbing, set my phone where it could hear everything. And through the thin wall I listened as they talked freely about post-acquisition plans, about staff reductions that somehow always hit the same groups, about how HR would handle the paperwork to make it all look clean. Swallowing that humiliation didn't feel heroic. It felt heavy, but every word they spoke was another brick in the case they were building against themselves. My phone buzzed a message from the board asking for an emergency meeting with the CEO, and that was the moment the air shifted. I stood up, straightened my back fully, for the first time that day, stepped into an empty conference room and called my attorney, told her to finalize the acquisition immediately and prepare discrimination claims. Because if you're going to expose a system, you do it with precision, not noise. After that, everything moved fast. Emails, calls, people whispering behind glass walls, smiles turning tight. Security was called not on me, but on people who looked like me. Young staff maintenance badges pulled, access revoked. And I documented it all because retaliation always leaves a trail. Richard demanded I be removed from the building, his voice loud enough for anyone to hear, and then the elevator doors opened. My executive team stepped out. Legal compliance assistants. The room froze, and I held up my badge. Didn't raise my voice, didn't need to. You could see it on their faces the exact second power left the room. Richard couldn't speak. Karen took a step back, and within minutes they were relieved of authority devices, confiscated, investigations opened. The all-hands meeting that followed wasn't comforting, it wasn't inspirational, it was factual. Screens filled with data pay gaps, promotion delays, termination patterns, names and dates laid out so plainly there was nowhere to hide. No one yelled, no one insulted, the evidence did all the talking. Richard was terminated for cause, no severance, no stock, his conduct forwarded for review. Karen followed her professional standing, unraveling just as quietly. Middle managers who enforced the system were demoted or dismissed, and the ones who stayed silent learned that silence has consequences too. Months later, the company looked different, not because of new slogans, but because of new structures. Real accountability, maintenance staff, elevated equity, measured and enforced. And when I walked back into that restroom a year later, it didn't feel like a place of humiliation anymore. It felt like proof that change doesn't have to be loud to be final. So here's what I want to know. Have you ever watched someone be judged, dismissed, or mistreated just because of how they looked? And did you say something or did you stay quiet? Because that line between the two is where systems survive. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Argue with me if you want. Share a story you've seen or lived, because silence protects injustice. And the truth always finds its way out.